Good morning. My name is Dominique Clemens. I'm the Operations Manager for Florida Citizens Alliance, and today I have the pleasure of being the MC and introducing our first speaker. Alex Newman is an award-winning international journalist, educator, author, and consultant who seeks to glorify God in everything he does. He has written for a wide array of publications in the United States and abroad. He's a contributor to the Epoch Times, a writer for WND, an education writer for Freedom Project Media, a correspondent for the Law Enforcement Intelligence Brief, and much more. Alex wrote a series of articles that were published in the New American magazine titled Rescuing Our Children, and he just recently started an organization called Public School Exit. Alex Newman digs deep and finds the truth, no matter how unsettling it may be. Please give a warm welcome to Alex Newman.
Thank you guys so much for being here. It's such an honor. And I just love the Florida Citizens Alliance. They are doing some of the best work in Tallahassee, and we're well represented by having them up there. So thank you guys for having me. They say you always need, let's give them a round of applause. That's good. They say you always need to start your talks with a joke, and I've got one that's kind of not all that funny, but, and if you're from Cuba or Venezuela, please don't answer. But what did socialists use for lighting before candles? Well, they had light bulbs and electricity and stuff, right? The good old days. And unfortunately, that's the direction we're headed, folks. That we are going in that direction at lightning speed. We've got now open socialists and communists in our Congress. We almost had one for governor, right? Fortunately, that didn't work out, but we were close, okay? We were very blessed to get, I think, the best governor in the nation, but amen, yep. And so all these issues that we care about, there's something that transcends all of them, and that is the education of our children. And as you guys will see, if we continue on this direction, we are going to end up as socialists. At least our country will be. So there is some really good news coming from this whole COVID madness, kind of a silver lining, if you will. The Census Bureau just released some data, and they showed that almost 20% of families in the state of Florida are now educating their children at home. So incredible news. So, a lot of bad things. We've all got to put face diapers on our face. At least some of us do sometimes, at least if you go on an airplane. But thank you, Governor DeSantis. But, it could have been worse. But this is really, really good news. This is really, really good news. Other things that are happening, parents are figuring out what's happening in their children's school. This virtual learning, the stuff is coming into the home. And the parents are like, wait, they're teaching you what? Because they had never seen it before. So now they know. And in many cases, during that brief period where we didn't have school here in Florida, the parents tried homeschooling, and they said, hey, we could do this. And the children are happier, and the family is stronger, and they're learning way more. And so some really good things happening. Also some bad things happening. If we have a little bit of time at the end, I'll show you some of what the government schools are doing in light of the COVID pandemic. And it is Orwellian to the max. You probably wouldn't believe some of it. Now, here's the data. I was talking about we're heading towards socialism. My generation, millennials, terribly embarrassing to admit that because then everybody knows you're an idiot, right? Or at least I think you are. But my generation, millennials, 70% say they will vote for socialists in the future. Guys, that's mine. Generation Z behind us is even worse. And they didn't wake up born socialists. In fact, I've got a 4-year-old at home, and when you take his things, he gets very mad. He said, that's my teddy bear, right? So my 4-year-old understands private property rights. My 4-year-old understands thou shalt not steal. And yet once kids get through high school, oh yeah, redistribute the wealth. Let's take everybody's stuff, and then I get some. Okay, so we are headed toward disaster. If you look at the polling data on religion, it's pretty frightening as well. My generation will be the first in all of American history where self-described Christians are now in the minority. Among millennials, less than half describe themselves as Christians. Compare that to upwards of 95% just a few generations ago. Okay, it's dropping like a rock. Now, what is replacing Christianity? And we'll go through the process, but I want to show you where this is all headed, because the state of California, where my friend Rebecca comes from, they just adopted, their state board of education just adopted unanimously this new ethnic studies model curriculum. And it's not mandatory for the whole state yet, but most of the largest school districts already said they were going to mandate it, and the state is very close to mandating it statewide as well. In there, you will find all kinds of horrors. One of them is a chant to the Aztec gods of cannibalism and human sacrifice. True story. And the children are supposed to ask for guidance in becoming warriors for social justice. They're supposed to ask these demon gods for liberation. One of the authors of this monstrosity actually wrote a book where he called for a counter-genocide against Christians. Okay, and I grew up in Mexico. I'm very familiar with the Aztec demon gods. We used to go regularly on school field trips to Tenochtitlan, where they had these big pyramids. And they'll tell you openly, there's signs everywhere. Oh, yeah, they would take tens of thousands of prisoners up there, and they'd chop out their hearts and then take a bite out of them and kick the dead bodies down the pyramid. So what's replacing Christianity, right? In the early 1960s, we still said prayers. We still taught the children the Ten Commandments. We still read the Bible at school. Now our children chant to demon gods of cannibalism and human sacrifice. And for those of you who know about the political system, the cancer that starts in California very quickly spreads across the rest of the nation. Now, every totalitarian of the last 100 years has understood something that unfortunately most Americans don't understand. And that is that the path to power runs right through the minds of the young people, of the children. And so Hitler put it this way. This actually came up in the Nuremberg trials. He alone who owns the youth gains the future. And if you stop and think about it, it's common sense, right? If you can shape the minds of the overwhelming majority of the next generation, you run the show, okay? And that's what the Nazis did, that's what the communists did, that's what Chairman Mao did, that's what Pol Pot did. They all went after the children. Because, we're the bitter clingers. We cling to our guns and our Bibles, and they don't like that. And they know that no matter how much propaganda they shove at us, we're not going to come on board. We're bitter clingers, after all. That's why they don't like us. So they're coming for our children. And that's what we need to understand. All these other battles that we're fighting, guys, bad news. We're going to lose every single one over the long term if we don't focus on this one. That's why I've made this a center focus of my efforts. Now, I brought the proof, right? I don't expect people to believe all of this stuff because, frankly, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't been researching it all these years. But so I brought the proof. And one of the key parts of brainwashing the children is driving a wedge between children and their parents, between children and their families. So instead of parents being in charge of raising the next generation, the government will take that responsibility. And they used to kind of lurk around in the shadows. They wouldn't really say that openly. Now they'll tell you on national television. So this is MSLSD.
We have never invested as much in public education as we should have because we've always had kind of a private notion of children. Your kid is yours and totally your responsibility. We haven't had a very collective notion of these are our children. So part of it is we have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents or kids belong to their families and recognize that kids belong to whole communities. Once it's everybody's responsibility and not just the households, then we start making better investments.
Yeah, kids belong to der Führer. The collective, right? Because collective worked so well in agriculture in the Soviet Union. Let's do that with our kids, right? This is crazy talk. And yet this is the dominant viewpoint among the policymaking class, the media elites, the people who run the government school system, the Democrat Party, big parts of the Republican Party, and it goes on. Now, this came out during the last year of the Obama administration. This is an official policy document from the Department of Education. They said, parents, you get to be equal partners with the government in the raising of your children. Isn't that cute? But then as you read through the document, you very quickly find out they don't really mean equal partners. You get to be the junior partner as long as you follow their instructions. If you step out of line, then we got to re-educate you. We got to give you parenting classes. And in a worst case, we might have to take your kids from you. Okay? That's where they're headed, folks. Here's Arnie Duncan, spent 7 years as Obama's education secretary. Listen to what he says.
And there are certain kids we should have 24/7 to really create a safe environment and give them a chance.
Yeah, give them the kids.
I think all of our schools should be community centers. Our schools should be open 12, 13, 14 hours a day with a wide variety of after-school.
Yeah, if you trust that guy to have your kids 24/7, you're a bad parent, okay? Let's just say it plainly. That guy is a maniac, and so are the people who believe that. Now, Hillary Clinton's been telling this for 2 decades at least, right? It takes a village to raise your children, and by that, if you read it, she means a government village, okay? And this is what happens when the government village raises your children. Okay, you guys remember these guys from Florida? Somebody shot up a school, and they said, I know, let's just take everybody's guns away, and then we won't have any more school shootings. Where'd they get that idea from? Right, in the 1930s, a 7-year-old could order a fully automatic machine gun from the Sears catalog, no questions asked. Guess how many school shootings we had? Zero, okay? So something changed, but it wasn't access to guns, okay? Something else changed, and I'm gonna show you what it is. They do have an agenda, and before we get into the specifics of what's happening in the schools, we're gonna look at what these people themselves say we're headed, right? We're headed in a specific direction. They have this big overarching plan. So I'm gonna show you the overarching plan, and then we'll get into the specifics of how they're making that happen. And you might have seen some of these, but in the context of education, I think they take on a whole new creepy tone. Here is George H.W. Bush talking about where the world is headed.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be.
Of course, I got all your kids,
we have a real
right?
chance at this new world order. An order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founder.
So by peacekeeping role, he means their troops, right? The goobers with the blue helmets that are famous around the world for atrocities. And the vision of the UN's founders, I mean, that's a really important statement right there. We know something about them. It was after World War II. Stalin sent Mr. Molotov, the guy who signed the pact with the Adolf Hitler regime to divide up Europe and enslave everybody. And then on our side, we sent this lovely guy called Alger Hiss. And man, they really liked him. That should have been our first red flag. Why are all these communists swooning over our representative there? They liked him so much, they made him the guy who chaired the conference that wrote the UN Charter. Then they made him the first Secretary General of the UN. And then we threw him in prison because we found out he was working for Joseph Stalin as a spy. So there's the vision of the UN's founders. I kind of like the vision of our founders. God created us all equally. God gave us rights. The purpose of government is to protect those. I think that's a nice vision. I don't think we need the UN's military to enforce the vision of the UN's founders. But that's where they're going. And of course, it's not just a Republican problem.
After 1989, President Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
Yeah, so Clinton agrees. China Joe agrees.
The affirmative task we have now is to actually create a new world order.
And I mean, I could go on for a week with these, but you get the point, right? They all want a new world order, and they all know that brainwashing your children is the way they're going to get it. And if you really want to understand what this agenda looks like, there's a real simple formula, and on every issue, you'll find every time it works. Take what the Bible says, flip it upside down. Okay, so the Bible says private property, thou shalt not steal. And so they teach our kids that private property is at the root of social injustice. It needs to be redistributed. God said he created them male and female. And this wouldn't have been controversial like 4 years ago, right? Basic biology. You don't have to be a Bible scholar to understand that. Well, now you're a hater if you believe that. You're a bigot. Now they're teaching our children that there is no gender. There's infinite genders. If you don't feel comfortable in your gender, we'll inject you with testosterone or estrogen. We'll chop off body parts. Right, this is what they're doing to our children right now, not just in California, all over the country. God ordained that there should be nations. He says repeatedly, he's the one who created nations. So they tell, oh, nations are bad. We need a global system. We're a global community now. Okay, family. Everything that God teaches, they flip it upside down, and that's where they're going. Now, they're actually really open about this, okay? You're probably going to wonder why they don't show you this on the TV, but I'll show you. They've been saying these things openly in their documents and in their international agreements for a long time. So they've got several international instruments that are leading us toward this vision that they have. And in case you watch CNN, you might have heard that Agenda 21 is a conspiracy theory. So let's just knock that out of the park, Mr. Bush.
We've signed a climate convention on the importance of economic instruments and free markets were included in this mammoth Agenda 21 document and the Rio Declaration.
All right. So, mammoth Agenda 21 document. Oh, and look who agrees. The communist leader of the House of Representatives.
The Earth Summit Environmental Leadership Act, as this is known, presents us with an opportunity to follow up on the important work of the Earth Summit to develop its blueprint, Agenda 21, for global environmental action. HCON Res 353 outlines a comprehensive national strategy for sustainable development in accordance with the principles of Agenda 21 to be coordinated under the leadership of a specific office and at the direction.
Anyway, the conspiracy requires secrecy, and they're talking about it openly, and they both agree, right? And so why are we talking about Agenda 21 in a conference on education? Well, you'll find out in just a moment. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with Agenda 21, this is the summary that the UN gave us. This was approved in 1992 by every government on the planet. They said it proposes an array of actions intended to be implemented by every person on Earth. Yeah, that means you and all your kids and all your grandkids. They said it requires a profound reorientation of all human society, unlike anything we've ever experienced. These huge plans, right? And nobody ever asked us. They just said, hey, it's coming, right? Now, what is their strategy? How are they going to accomplish this? We're the bitter clingers. We don't agree with this, right? So, well, they tell us. Go to chapter 36. I pulled these right out of the text of the agreement. You can find it on the UN's website. Education, they say, is going to be critical for promoting sustainable development. They say that formal and non-formal education are going to be indispensable for changing people's attitudes. In other words, without education, they can't make this happen. They know it, they say it in their own agreements, and every government on planet Earth signed up for this monstrosity. They tell you also that it's critical, education is, for achieving the right values and behavior and attitudes consistent with sustainable development. It's got to include spiritual development, and we'll get into that before we leave here today. I think chanting to Aztec deities will suffice, but they've got a lot of other fun stuff in mind as well. And here's a sample, right? This is a book actually produced by the UN for our children. It's being used in government schools all over the world, and I have a copy in my office. The whole thing is a monstrosity, but you look up there, you see the picture, you've got the gods, and they're very upset because the storks are delivering all these babies. And then on the next page, you find out why they're so upset. It says the earth groans every time it registers another birth. Remember the rule I told you? What does God say? He says, be fruitful and multiply. He says children are a blessing. And so what do they teach our children? That the earth groans every time. Oh, poor Mother Earth. She's just groaning every time you have another baby. Isn't it terrible? Okay, that's what they're teaching your kids all over the world. And so, parents who are, 60, 70, wondering, why aren't my kids having kids? When am I ever going to get grandkids? This is the garbage that your children were taught. So you got to unbrainwash them. Now, I've been following the UN clown show around for a decade now as a journalist. I went down to Rio in 2012, exactly 20 years after they signed up Agenda 21. And this is the poster. They had the kids drawing them. They were all over the venue. Obviously, it was chaired by a Chinese communist named Xia Zhakung. And you see the earth looks very sick. He's got the thermometer. And then the doctor diagnoses the problem. You have humans. Okay? And the children were conscripted into making these posters. Now, if you go to their more recent agreement, this was adopted in 2015. Every government on planet Earth signed on, including Obama. They call it Agenda 2030, or the Sustainable Development Goals. This is much shorter, much more readable. You can go get a copy. You could probably finish it in 20 minutes. And again, they tell you your kids are the route that we're going to take to total power. So your children are critical agents of change. They're going to use these new goals to create a better world. And hey, we all want a better world, right? What do they mean by better world? Well, go down to goal number 10, and you'll get a hint. National socialism, aka Nazism, is no longer enough. Now we need international, global socialism. They say we've got to reduce inequality, not just within countries, right? No more national socialism. Now we need to reduce the inequality among countries. So that means take the wealth of middle-class Americans and redistribute it to third-world dictators who've impoverished their people. Okay? We call that communism, Marxism, socialism, take your pick. But we've heard this exact rhetoric before. Every mass-murdering communist dictator of the 20th century has said, hey, we got to reduce inequality. We're just going to redistribute the wealth. Okay, we've heard this rhetoric before. It always leads to disaster. You go on, they say they're going to make fundamental changes in the way we produce and consume goods by taking control of the means of production. Where have we heard that before? And then in Goal 4, by 2030, all learners, every single one of your children, and by the way, homeschoolers, they didn't put in there an exemption for you. All learners need to be so brainwashed, they won't just passively submit to this sustainable ideology, they will actively promote it. Okay, that's what they are saying. This is in the UN's own agreements. Here's the videos they're putting out on their YouTube channel. Okay, you don't have to believe me.
Achieve sustainable development that protects our planet and builds a more inclusive, equal, and peaceful world without education. We can't. Sustainable development begins with education. Put global education first.
It begins with education, okay? That's them, not me. It begins with education. So they understand how important this is. Now, I want to show you how well they have mastered this, because they are experts at transforming the values of your children. In fact, Benjamin Bloom, one of the bigwigs in behavioral psychology who designed so many of these systems, he bragged that in 1 hour he could undo everything parents did in 16 years. So I want to show you just one example of how this works. In the early 1990s, they started showing this documentary in government schools all over America. It's called, it's elementary, talking about gay issues at school, produced by some homosexuals. And look at what they were teaching children all over America, first, second, and third grade.
Homosexual activists believe that elementary school children should be taught that homosexuality is a natural and normal variation of human sexuality. One homosexual teacher steers his kids to the politically correct view of marriage.
So this is a clip from the documentary.
Let me tell
now.
you quickly the background. Today, the law says that if you're the same sex, 2 men and 2 women, you can't get married. It is against the law. And I thought that it might be kind of fun for us to sort of be pretend judges for a few minutes. What I'm going to give each of you is a sheet that just tells you that some people think that it's wrong for gays to get married, that it's not natural, and that it goes against what a family is. Other people think that the state should not decide these things, that it should just be up to 2 adults to decide what they want to do. What do you think the answer to these questions are? Should gays be allowed?
So, and it goes on for a long time, and all, oh yeah, that's horrible. How mean that we don't let people who love each other get married. Did you catch what they said? Let's be pretend judges. Kids all over America in the early 1990s were told, let's be pretend judges. And let's consider this mean old ban on poor, loving homosexuals marrying each other. Let's be pretend judges. And what happened? 2015, the pretend judges on our Supreme Court struck down marriage laws and constitutions in all 50 states in total violation of the U.S. Constitution and gave us something new called homosexual marriage. In fact, they said there was a right to have a homosexual marriage. Okay? And if you had asked somebody in the early 1990s, it wasn't even on their radar. You would have been called a kook for even suggesting something like that could happen, and yet they were preparing the children. Okay, we're going to be pretend judges. Here's where we are today. Drag queen story hour. Obviously, that's a man wearing a dress with some demon horns, so you know where it came from, right? Straight from the pit of hell. And now I'll show you what they're teaching the kids today. If you went to school prior to like 2000, you probably remember that carbon dioxide is the gas of life. Everybody exhales about 2 pounds of it every day. The plants use it for photosynthesis. I talked to Donald Trump's climate advisor. I got him on camera. I interviewed him, Dr. Will Happer of Princeton. He said the Earth is starving for CO2. Plants are designed, he said, to live in an atmosphere with 4 to 5 times as much as we have right now. Well, they're teaching your kids that CO2, the gas you exhale, is actually this horrible toxic pollution, but if you pay taxes on it, then they'll be able to control the temperature of the planet. Okay? You guys laugh because that's idiotic in the extreme, right? It's pseudoscientific nonsense. But from a totalitarian perspective, think about how genius. There's nothing you can do, nothing. You can't eat, you can't sleep, you can't turn on a light switch, you can't start your car, you can't even die without producing CO2. So if we accept the premise that CO2 is pollution, you pollute every second of every day, and you got to pay tax on that now. You got to submit to global regulation. And you know, to us, it sounds absolutely absurd. But when you teach it to a kindergartner, and the kindergartner was told by his mommy and daddy, hey, pay attention to the teacher, remember what you're told, suddenly you open up a whole new can of worms. Well, here's what they're teaching the kids. This is Florida, by the way.
You've heard the reports. The globe's warming. It's our fault, and the consequences will be terrible.
Children are frightened.
I worry. My mom worries. The water might rise and it might flood the whole town.
We won't be able to survive for long.
What are you most worried will happen?
We'll all die.
Are there some people who say this isn't true?
Yes. Yes.
Might they be right?
No.
Those are the bad people.
How do you know they're not right?
Well, because the earth is getting hotter.
Where do you learn this?
Collier County, Florida. Looks more like a cult meeting, a doomsday cult, than a school, but it's a public school right here. Don't drink the Kool-Aid, whatever you do, please. And now, watch this.
One of the main components after educating the students of global warming is that they're given a letter for their families to sign, and this is the congressman.
So you brainwash them, and then you give them a letter for their family to sign for the congressman. And we wonder why our Congress is so out of control, because they're brainwashing our children, okay? And we're now several generations deep into this. Now, this is my friend Charlotte Iserbyt. She was Ronald Reagan's senior advisor on education policy. And when she got to the Department of Education, she came across all these documents that showed they were merging our education system with the Soviet system. And so she started leaking those. She said, this is horrible. What's going on here? Here's what she says is going on in the public school system.
You think the purpose of education is reading, writing, and arithmetic? The purpose of education is to change the thoughts, actions, and feelings of students.
Oh, well, here it is from somebody who loves this idea. Shirley McCoon. This is a governor's conference in 1989, convened by George H.W. Bush. Listen carefully to what she says they're doing through the education system.
Fix up these schools and taking care of them, rather than the issue of understanding that what we're into is a total restructuring of the society.
Okay, in the interest of time, we're going to skip some of this. But now, listen, total transformation of our society, the total restructuring of our society. Look at how they're going to bring it about. And again, this is the lady who was writing the national standards before anybody in this room probably knew we had national standards. She's standing in front of all 50 state governors. Now, listen to what she says.
The other function of schools, which sounds paradoxical and yet in a sense is really not, is the fact that we have to prepare students not for today's society, but for a society that's 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road. And so we have to anticipate what the future is.
They use their crystal ball for that part.
Back and figure out what it is we need to do today. That's called anticipatory socialization, or the social change function of school.
The social change function. How many parents do you think wake up in the morning, all right, Johnny, get ready for school. We got to get the social change function. Yeah, I bet you not many. Okay. Now, what does this look like? Well, we've got men showering and changing with little girls. This is right here on the west coast of Florida, Chasco Middle School. A male teacher was ordered to go in and watch an underage girl get naked before PE class. And he said, I can't do that. That's great. That was a crime like last year, right? Because this girl was claiming to be transgender, so she was going into the boys' bathroom and changing for sports. And the school said, well, hey, we're going to have to get rid of you. And not just that, we got the emails afterward. They said, we're going to destroy this guy. We got to get rid of his teaching license, so he'll never be able to teach again. That'll send a message to all the teachers that they keep their mouths shut. Okay. In Minnesota, the government school districts, the equal partners, they knew better than the other equal partner, the parents. And so this boy decided he was a girl. And the parents said, no, honey, get back on the bus. That's ridiculous. And the school took him to go have what they call now, I think, it's not a sex change surgery anymore. Now it's a gender affirmation surgery. So they removed his private parts, without getting too graphic, and sent him back. And the parents said, and now there's a federal lawsuit, but guess what? You can't reattach the parts after they're gone. This comes from California. I pulled this right off of the government website. They've got a gender transition plan. You can download a form. You can tell the school, this is my pronoun, this is how I identify. My parents don't know, so please don't tell them. They'll help you get medical treatments, they call it, which is testosterone injections for girls, preparing for mutilation. For 5-year-olds in the health education framework, this is the book they recommended, Infinite Genders. Here is the National Education Association. Our friend Rebecca will talk about this in a moment. But they sent this out to their mailing list. They partnered with the Human Rights Campaign, the most vicious LGBT group in the country. They want to put you in prison for refusing to bend the knee to their golden idol. Listen to what this video says.
You said it's cool when teachers ask pronouns. That was never a thing. When I was in elementary school or even middle school, did you find that you had to ask for that or even educate your teachers?
Well, when I had a substitute, sometimes I had to.
Yeah. So this went out to all their teachers, and the part before that is what's your pronoun? Oh, I'm Z. Oh, but you can call me Tree. Right? This is the madness. And then, oh, did you have to educate? Oh, no, my teachers already know. Only when a substitute comes in, sometimes I have to teach them to ask my pronouns. Okay? This is the mainstream in government indoctrination centers. Okay? And it's working. Are you surprised? In the state of California, the UCLA put out this survey they did a couple years ago. 27% of California's children, ages 12 through 17, are now gender non-conforming. Okay, when I was a kid, not that long ago, I grew up in 8 different countries on 4 different continents. I knew tens of thousands of kids. I never once in my entire life met a boy who didn't understand he was a boy or a girl who didn't understand she was a girl. Not a single time in my whole life. The word transgender wasn't even in the dictionary. Today, 27% of California's children are gender non-conforming. It's probably higher than that at this point. Okay. And you're like, well, in my conservative district, that doesn't happen. Well, I was in Utah last year, and I had a meeting with some of their top education officials, and they gave me this interesting data from their state, one of the most conservative states in the union. Okay, and they had the medical data from the Office of Professional Licensing Regulation on prescriptions that were being prescribed for these kids to go through gender transitions. The number of children, underage children, going through gender transitions increased 10,000% in 5 years, from 2015 to 2020. Anybody who thinks that that's an accident or that it's something that's in the water is not paying attention. It's because they're brainwashing these poor kids in the government school system. And now the final frontier, right? The last taboo remaining, you don't mess with kids. It's coming. Okay, this video was sent to me by a mom. She's actually become very prominent now. She's helping to lead the battle in California. But she sent me this. She confronted the assistant superintendent there because she found out, and she sent me the PowerPoint presentation. They passed this LGBT law where they had to teach all the kids the history of LGBTism. And so, they go back, oh, in ancient Greece, grown men would have lots of sex with boys. What? And this mom goes to the assistant superintendent for curriculum and says, what are you doing teaching my kids pedophilia? What's wrong with you? Well, watch what she says.
Answer me why you're teaching pedophilia in school to ninth graders. Teaching what? Pedophilia, pederasty, right here.
Pederasty, as I've discussed with you before, twice in my office, when you come to view the materials, I've explained to you that this is done because we are talking about historical perspectives of how gender relations and different types of sexual orientations have existed in history. So this is something that's occurred in history, and so this is really important for us to include.
Yeah, we're just teaching different types of gender relations that have existed in history. It's just a different sexual orientation. Yeah, raping children. Yeah. What? Okay, now think about the implications of this, folks. It's not just the state of California anymore. It's now against the law everywhere to discriminate based on someone's sexual orientation. And they're teaching California's children that raping children is just a different sexual orientation. So project the lines and you'll see where this is going. And it's not an isolated incident. Here's a picture somebody took of a classroom in California. I don't know if you can see up there. Unfortunately, it's not very clear. It says pedophilia as sexual orientation. Okay, now the UN is promoting this big time. A couple years ago, the UNESCO, the UN's education agency, released this report on global international sex ed standards, and it would blow you away. 5-year-olds should know about masturbation. I mean, these are things that you can't even discuss in polite company, and they want to teach them to kindergarten children, okay? It's all based on the ravings of this child-raping lunatic, Alfred Kinsey. The wonderful woman who exposed him, Dr. Judith Reisman, just passed away less than a week ago. But this guy here, back in the 40s and 50s, with money from the Rockefellers and from the CIA, did all this so-called sex research. And you can get his books, Sexuality and the Human Male, table 31 through 34. You'll find all the data. They were raping children, including babies as young as 4 months old, with stopwatches. And without getting too graphic, they'd say, oh, look, this one had 5 climaxes after being stimulated for 24 hours. That means children are sexual from birth. That means the moment we can get our hands on them, we need to teach them every raunchy sex ed thing that you can possibly imagine. And some of you are probably feeling sick. Well, imagine how your children feel when they're being put through this nonsense. And it's happening everywhere, folks. Now, they're also dumbing down the kids. You know, we think we send our kids to learn how to read, write, do math. Pfft, forget it. They don't do that anymore. Now they learn gender ideology and climate change. Okay. Dr. Sandra Stotsky, very nice lady. She was the only English expert they put on the Common Core Validation Committee, the only English expert, and naturally she refused to sign off. She said, this is going to reduce their critical thinking abilities. We're taking out all the great literature. This is absurd. I'm not being a party to this. The only math expert, Dr. James Milgram from Stanford University, also refused to sign off. He said, this is non-challenging, this is ridiculous, some of it's based on incorrect math. Okay, well, let's mandate that in all 50 states then. That'll go real well. And I don't know if you guys heard, now math is racist anyway, so maybe we can just dispense with all of it. But that's where they're going, folks. The government knows this is dumbing down your kids. They did a study. They funded a study. They found a significant negative effect on children after they're exposed to this madness in the Common Core. They've got pseudoscience, right? They've now developed the next generation pseudoscience standards, same as people as the Common Core. And guess what? In 12 years of so-called science, they will never, if the teachers follow the standards, they will never hear the term scientific method. That should alarm you. That's why they would believe something as ridiculous as the idea that the gas we exhale is going to destroy the planet. That's why they believe all of this nonsense, because they don't understand science. They've got fake history. They got the 1619 Project. The history of America is the history of slavery, racism, oppression, and genocide. Okay, you wonder why your kids want to burn down the country, why they're burning down our cities, why they want to kill cops. It's because they're being taught fraudulent history. The most widely used history textbook in America, People's History of the United States, was written by a member of the Communist Party USA, Howard Zinn. There's a lunatic if you ever met one. These are the people educating our children on the history of our country. But at least they're learning how to read, write, and do math. No. Just kidding. And you don't have to believe me. The government will proudly tell you, as long as they can end it with, give us more money. Okay, so these are their data points. This came out in 2019, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. Every 2 years, they do a representative study of all the children in America to figure out where they are, all the government school victims. And what they found is that over 2/3 of 8th graders are below proficiency in math. By the time they get to high school, by the time they graduate, less than 1/3 of high school seniors are even proficient in reading. And mind you, we're not talking about they're good at it. We're not talking about they have decent skills. We're talking proficient. And if you knew what they define as proficient, you would laugh, okay? We've got millions of children graduating from high school who literally, and I use the word literally cannot read their high school diploma, okay? We pay $20,000 a year. They have them for 14 years, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and they graduate unable to read their high school diploma, okay? But they know all about gender ideology. Okay, here is the Undersecretary of Education speaking on this.
The National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP, which is called America's Report Card, reports that 2/3, get this, 2/3 of American 8th graders are not proficient in any core subject.
Can you imagine a business that charged you $20,000 a year per child, and 2/3 of their customers weren't even proficient in what they claim to be doing? I'm pretty sure you'd want a refund, right? Well, welcome to the public school system. And they say, oh, just give us more money, and then we'll fix it. We've heard that before. Now, what they do, they go on field trips to learn about Islam. They got the 5 pillars of Islam. This is in Kansas. They've got Buddhism in the classroom. They call it mindfulness education. They've got yoga in the classroom, which is just Hinduism. They summon ancestor spirits. This is a teacher training program from Black Lives Matter for teachers all across the country. We won't watch the whole video, but they're teaching the teachers to teach the children to summon their ancestor spirits into the classroom. Very weird chanting, and in the interest of time, we'll skip it. Now, how do we get Christian privilege out of the schools? Because, we have a lot of that, right? Well, the U.S. government funded this report here. They said one way to get rid of Christian privilege in the schools is to infuse the curriculum with Islamic thought. Okay. In North Carolina, they forced the little Christian kids to stand up in front of the classroom and apologize for their Christian privilege. Okay, and here's the data gathering tools they're using. It would blow you away. In the interest of time, we'll focus on the facial expression camera. And this was already in use in 2013, by the way. I pulled this right out of a U.S. Department of Education report. And so this camera looks at the facial expressions that students make and determines what their response is to various stimuli. So maybe a guy with a dress and some demon horns comes in and reads LGBT stories, and your kid makes a face and says, what is that? Aha. This one needs an intervention. Okay, that's what they're doing with this, guys. And then I also pulled this out of the same report. They tell you what they're doing with all this data. Okay, this is a direct quote. Big data captured from users' online behaviors enables the algorithms to infer the user's knowledge, intention, and interest, and to create models for predicting their future behavior and interests. That's why they're collecting all the data, folks. Now, if you want to know more on where it's all going in light of the coronavirus, I did this piece for the Epoch Times, CCP virus ushers in brave new world of techno-utopian education. I encourage you to check it out because these people are shouting from the rooftops what they are doing with the education system in light of the COVID pandemic. It is creepy beyond anything you can imagine. We're using communist Chinese technology and methods. They're calling this the Great Reset, and of course the Great Reset has an education component. And if you read this maniac's books, Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, he'll tell you where they're going. He's talking about putting microchips in people's brains and fusing them with your brain. And I know it sounds like terrible science fiction, but that's where they're going. Here he is. Listen to him talk about the Fourth Industrial Revolution. They're going to stick microchips in all of our heads to be able to read our thoughts. Listen.
It's at the end. What the Fourth Industrial Revolution will lead to is a fusion of our physical, our digital, and our biological identities.
A fusion of our digital and our biological identities. Go read his book. It will send shivers down your spine. So they got values clarification. I remember this very well as a child. The exercise they used on me, they said, so you're in a ship and your ship is sinking and you got to all hop into a lifeboat, but there's 10 of you now in the lifeboat and the lifeboat only holds 9. Who are you going to throw overboard? You've got a teacher and a doctor and a lawyer. And obviously the correct answer is lawyer. Just kidding. But what does this do to the kids? You know, they're thinking, well, hey, mom and dad said we shouldn't murder people. The pastor said we shouldn't murder people. God said we shouldn't murder people. But here, the only ethical solution is to get rid of somebody and throw them overboard and feed them to the sharks. Okay. That's a very dangerous thing to do to children, because what do they conclude? Oh, mom and dad are wrong, pastor's wrong, God is wrong. Actually, there is no morality. It's just subjective. It depends on the situation. Maybe there is a time and a place to get rid of old people or unborn babies, or put people in camps. Right? It depends on the situation. We just don't know. Okay? And if they had been thinking outside the box, they just, well, hey, we don't have to murder anybody. We could just take turns swimming, right? I'll swim 30 minutes and swim alongside the raft, and then we'll switch, right? We don't have to die. That's crazy. But you're not supposed to think like that. Now, Ronald Reagan put together a commission, National Commission on Excellence in Education. He said that this education system threatens our very future as a nation and as a people. He said, the commission said if a foreign power had imposed this on us, we would have viewed it as an act of war. Okay, and we should. And now that was back in the early 1980s. The situation has gotten significantly worse since then. And the reality is we fell so far. Okay, in early America, Americans were the best educated people on the planet. We've got all kinds of data on this. This literacy survey by DuPont de Nemours, published in 1812, they said not more than 4 in 1,000 young Americans are unable to write legibly, even neatly. Okay. I bet we'd struggle to find 4 out of 1,000 young people today who could write legibly, okay? And that was 200 years ago, before we had this massive network of government indoctrination centers posing as schools. Alexis de Tocqueville wrote about the incredible education system that existed in America in the early 1800s. Everybody knows their religion and the Constitution. They know everything, right? How do they do that? In colonial America, before any government schools, we had a thriving free market education system with schools for everything. And then came Robert Owen, a communist before communism was cool. He laid the foundation for what would come later. He wrote these essays saying that really government should control education. That way we'll get rid of this Christianity and this individualism, and we'll move toward a more collective notion of where we should be. Well, long story short, this essay made it over to Prussia through the Prussian ambassador. The Prussian king decided, hey, we need a system like that. Design me one, please, Mr. Interior Minister. They did. He also, this Robert Owen, set up a secret society, as it was described by people who were involved in it, modeled on the Carbonari, with 2 objectives: get men elected to the legislatures who support a government takeover of education, and shift public opinion to have support for a government takeover of education. Well, this guy, who eventually came to Christ and repented of the evil, he was involved in this secret society. He was organizing upstate New York. He said the great object was to get rid of Christianity. That was their goal, okay? Unbelievable stuff. Then Horace Mann came along. He was our first real education bureaucrat in America. He was the Secretary of Education for Massachusetts, the first of any state ever, and he loved the Prussian model. He brought it to Massachusetts. The government should train the teachers, the government should educate the children, the government should control the curriculum. Right away, the quackery came in, the whole word quackery that teaches children to be illiterate for the rest of their lives. They tried that in Boston. Fortunately, the schoolmasters had enough sense to get rid of it after a couple years, because it was a disaster. So we didn't hear about it again for 50 years. Then came John Dewey. Now, if you talk to anybody with an education degree, they'll say, oh yeah, he's the founding father of our government brainwash system. Okay, everybody knows it. School's named after him. Well, he, instead of going to Prussia, he went to the Soviet Union, and he loved it. He wrote back these essays about how wonderful the Soviet system was, especially the Soviet education system. He wrote this essay that we republished in our book, Crimes of the Educators. He says, change must come gradually. To force it unduly would compromise its final success by favoring a violent reaction. That sounds like the language of a conspirator to me. He wanted to fundamentally transform America, as Barack Obama would later say, and he knew that the way to do it was to get the children. That's why he focused his efforts on education. He resurrected the whole word quackery that I mentioned, that Horace Mann had initially brought into the schools. We now know, even from brain scans, that this even damages children's brains. And you're probably not surprised to know that it's mandatory under Common Core. In kindergarten, the kids are supposed to memorize whole words. Okay, we've known for a long time. He was also a very religious man. He was one of the co-authors of the first Humanist Manifesto. These are direct quotes from the manifesto. The very first tenet is that religious humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. It's a radical statement. God said in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created. Okay, so right off the bat, they tell you where they stand. And even if you're not a Bible-believing Christian, this has really important implications for you and your liberty. Our founding fathers said it was a self-evident truth that we were created and that God gave us rights. And yet John Dewey says, oh, there's no creator, don't be silly. Well, what happens if there's no creator? You have no rights. Okay, pretty simple. Now, in 1962, the Supreme Court formalized all this. They ruled that we could not have a prayer in schools. Then in 1963, no more Bibles in the schools. Okay, they said the First Amendment requires this. If you've read the First Amendment, you know how ridiculous that is. And then at least one of the dissenting justices, Justice Potter Stewart, pointed out exactly what was happening, and he hit the nail on the head. This is not the realization of a state of neutrality with respect to religion, but rather the establishment of a religion of secularism. The very thing Congress was not allowed to do, establish a religion, the Supreme Court did with these crazy rulings. They just established the religion of John Dewey instead of the religion of America. Now it's going global. The UN is trying to brainwash children all over the world with this garbage. They say it openly. They've got international agreements that make this clear. Right? This in 1990, they agreed that all children have to learn from the same standards. The basic learning needs and the basic learning content is a common universal responsibility. So it's a UN responsibility. In 2000, they said education has to change the values, attitudes, behavior, and beliefs of your children. These are all UN agreements. Every government on planet Earth has signed them. Here's the head of the UN in 2015 explaining what the purpose of education is.
Education must do more than produce individuals who can read, write, and count. It must nurture global citizens who can rise to the challenges of
global citizens. Now, in 2016, the next year, they came up with a new agreement that the government schools should deal with the spirituality of children. It gets really crazy. Here's them talking about it.
The 2030 Agenda is our roadmap to inclusive and quality education for all. UNESCO, the UN's specialized agency for education, is leading the global and regional coordination of this ambitious goal, responding to cutting-edge global challenges, supporting countries to build better education systems, and monitoring progress to make sure the world stays on course.
So the UN's going to monitor our progress to make sure we stay on course with their international agenda. Isn't that cute? And surely that's not in America. Oh, yes, it is, right? Arne Duncan was very proud that UNESCO was his partner in global education reform. Now, the UN's got what they call a World Core curriculum, and the name resemblance to the Common Core is more than coincidental. It was written by a guy called Robert Mueller, and if you read the teacher's manual, he says, and this is a direct quote, the underlying philosophy upon which it's based is in the books of Alice Bailey by the Tibetan teacher Javal Kuhl. Well, quick fun fact, since most people don't know who Alice Bailey was, she was the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company. Okay? Tells you all you need to know about where it's going. She wrote all these books with the help of these ascended masters, these spiritual entities she claimed to be in communication with, about how the education system will lead us to this wonderful one world government, one world religion. Okay? And the World Core curriculum that the UN is peddling around the world is based on the ravings of these lunatics. You can read it for yourself. Okay, now Common Core, Bill Gates went over to UNESCO headquarters in 2004, signed a deal with them. We're going to create a global education system, global teaching standards, global curricula, and then he created Common Core. Now here's a video from the Common Core people telling you what's going on. Oh, do we not have that video? Well, we don't have that video, but anyways, they're bragging about how Common Core is aligned with international standards, and now children in Shanghai and Paris will learn the same as the children in Chicago and Florida. Okay, that's where they're going, and they're bragging about it. So everything I just showed you is a fact. You can find it all for yourself. I'll send you the documents. You saw the videos. I'm going to share a couple minutes with you of my opinion, and then we'll close with the Word of God. So in my view, we need to really seriously consider this. Everything is on the line, guys. Everything. So the first question is, can we reform this system? Can we make it better? Well, I submit to you that the answer is an emphatic no. It was designed to do exactly what it's doing. You can't fix something that's not broken. It's very effective in doing what it's supposed to. So as I see it now, we've got two options. We can get our kids out as quickly as possible, as many as possible, or get ready for all that crazy stuff they were talking about. New World Order, where the UN will create the rule of law and they'll use their peacekeeping troops and all the rest. So we need a Dunkirk operation. Right? In World War II, British troops were surrounded by the Nazis, about to be completely annihilated. The British people got on their knees and they prayed, and then they put every resource in their society at the disposal of this rescue operation. Everything that could float went across the English Channel to bring the boys back, and guess what? They're not speaking German on the British Isles today, thank goodness. Okay, so it worked. So now we need to be thinking in those terms. Our children are about to be annihilated by the enemies of liberty, by the enemies of God. And we as parents, as grandparents, as citizens have an obligation to do everything in our power to stop it. So I think of it as like a burning building, right? If your children are trapped inside a burning building, what do? Well, you write a petition, right? You run for school board. You go have a protest. No, right? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those things. We should do those things. But we need to get our priorities in order. First, we rescue the children. Then we write a petition. Then we go get the firefighters and say, you know, guys, come on, let's put this fire out before it burns down our whole community. Okay, so we need to get our priorities straight. The first thing that needs to be done is to get our children out as quickly as humanly possible. And it's actually worse than a fire, mind you, because a fire will just hurt them physically. The schools are hurting them mentally and physically and spiritually and academically and morally in every possible way. They're being destroyed, folks. Pastors, priests, rabbis, you need to warn your congregation about this. 80 to 90% of Christian children who go through 12 years of this indoctrination program will leave the church. Okay? Your churches aren't going to survive if the children keep going to these brain. I know you don't want to offend the 2 public school teachers in your congregation. Guess what? You're going to have no congregation if this continues. Okay, now COVID has given us an incredible opportunity. Almost 20% of the children in the state of Florida are now being homeschooled, according to the Census Bureau. Okay, the number of homeschool families has more than doubled since the start of this pandemic. We've got in Alaska now 27.5% of children are being homeschooled. Oklahoma over 20%. So now we've got a historic opportunity, and this is true homeschooling. This isn't government brainwashing at home. So since I started this campaign, incredible things have happened. President Trump has urged parents to protect their children from failing government schools. Rush Limbaugh repeatedly before he died said parents need to get their children out of these brainwash camps. Franklin Graham said you got to get your children out. So the tide is shifting. Now, why do we have education? Well, of course, it's so we can buy a fancy car and retire in Florida. No, right? Well, God says that there's a lot of reasons why we have education, but the primary one is to know Him. Now, who should be in charge of education? Not Caesar, right? Read your Bible. Parents should train up the children in the way that they should go. They should teach the children God's laws when they wake up, when they sit down, when they're eating, when they're walking by the way, when they're laying down, right? Not just when Caesar doesn't have them, okay? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom and the beginning of knowledge. That's what God's Word says. And guess what? There is no fear of the Lord. You can't even mention the Lord in a public school. So you think they're going to get knowledge or wisdom? The answer is self-evidently no. Okay? Hosea tells us that my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Martin Luther said if you send your child to a school where the scriptures are not diligently taught, you might as well send them to the great gates of hell. Okay? Pope Pius XI said any education devoid of God is full of error. Okay? Doesn't matter if you're Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, the church fathers, the church, and the Bible all teach that education is about coming to know God. It's got to be God-centered. John Milton said the primary purpose of our learning is to know God. And of course, we're blessed to live in a self-governing republic. That means we need to learn how to govern ourselves, okay? So homeschooling is amazing. That's a picture of my family and I. Homeschoolers are running circles around the victims of government schools. We've got millions of homeschool children, and they give me hope for the future. I say, you know, one homeschooler could probably take on 100 government school victims with 2 hands tied behind their back. No problem, no, not even break a sweat. So good things happening, guys. A lot of great private schools out there. Do your due diligence before sending your kids to a private school. Some of them are just as woke as the government schools, so you want to be careful. We've got a lot of resources. They mentioned Public School Exit. It's a new ministry we launched. We've got a phenomenal team. We will help your church. We will get you a scholarship. Whatever you need to get the kids out, we are right there to hold your hand and walk you through it. We've got lawyers. We've got educators. We've got pastors. Anything you need, we can help. Now, the UN is coming for our education freedom. The state of New York now wants to shut down the Jewish schools because they don't teach enough government propaganda. Law professors are now from Harvard and William and Mary saying we got to get rid of parental rights. We got to ban homeschooling. They're brainwashing. They're dumbing down our kids. But we've got our guns, right? We're going to resist the tyranny with our guns. They never take my guns. Well, guess what, guys? They don't need your guns. Once they have your kids, your guns are a moot point. Throw them in the trash. What are you going to do when your kids come to take your guns? The answer is obviously nothing. Okay? So guns are not going to help. Political activism is not going to help over the long term. We've got to get the kids out. Our founders risked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honors for the sake of liberty and future generations. The least we can do is make a little sacrifice and get our kids out. Now, I want to close with a scripture because this is not just an education battle. It's not just a political battle. It's actually a spiritual battle. And if you read the Bible, it teaches that very clearly. God says in Ephesians 6:12 that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, and against spiritual wickedness in high places. That's what we're up against. We wouldn't send child soldiers to go fight a war. We'd be fools to send our children to go fight spiritual war for us before they've been properly trained. That's all I have. Thank you guys so much, and God bless you.
We have just a few minutes. If we have any questions, we can take a few questions.
Question is this on video somewhere? Because I think that the best way to get this to really, I mean, you blew me away. First of all, I thought I was knowledgeable, and what you just said was crazy. Do you have a video on YouTube that we can all start putting on social media to get really what's going on out there?
Thank you for the question. Actually, I'm just scratching the surface. I'm just showing you guys the tip of the iceberg. This is being live streamed, right? Will that video be available?
Yes, this video will be available. We'll send it out. And then also, if you look on YouTube, Rescuing Our Children, Alex Newman, there's a bunch of videos with this stuff.
YouTube's doing their best to suppress it. But I've given similar talks to this. In 2019, I did a speaking tour. So it keeps evolving. Every time I give it, it's different. But you'll get kind of the general substance with some of the same examples and stuff. So.
Okay, and then I just have a follow-up question.
Sure.
Is this what is happening in the universities as well?
The universities are even worse, believe it or not. They take the product of the government school system and then they supercharge the insanity. So if I had more time, my friend Duke, I think he's going to speak by video today. He's really focused on the universities. He teaches at the University of Wisconsin. So he can show it gets even crazier. I mean, if the stuff in the younger ages is crazy, the universities will just blow your minds. So, yes, ma'am, in the back.
Because of the banning and the censorship, what do you suggest we do? Because a lot of us are quasi-political activists. We're doing everything that you said. That's great idea, but it's not working. How do we get the message out?
Great question. Thank you. I recommend a lot of things. We've produced a lot of resources, including the special report, Rescuing Our Children, that she mentioned. That's a whole special issue of the New American Magazine where we kind of lay out the case. We're coming out with a sequel. Dr. Duke Pesta and I will be releasing that this summer. And that's an easy tool that you can give to people. You can share this video to people. I recommend people subscribe to print publications and start organizing real in-person things, right? Because I think the internet may not be open to us as really an effective vehicle for organizing and for disseminating information. We're already seeing the doors closing there. So we just got to go back to what we used to do before the internet, right? In 1980s, 1990s, we used pamphlets, magazines, flyers, and publicschoolexit.com. We've got all kinds of resources. We've got handouts for pastors. We've got a whole team that can come in and work with your pastors. We could set up a private school if that's what people want, and that's at publicschoolexit.com.
All right, we've got one question over there.
Yes, sir.
Hi. First of all, thank you for your speech, for your presentation. I want to know if Christians played any role in building the governmental brainwashing system. From what I understand, there was a conflict in the 1840s in Philadelphia called the Bible Wars. It was a conflict between Protestants and Roman Catholics as to which Bible would be taught in the public schools. And the Protestant majority wanted to teach Protestant religion through the government schools because they believed that was a proper role for government, and it was a dominant culture back then. So did Christians really play a role in the establishment of the public school system? And is this a lesson in unintended consequences?
Excellent question. And actually, I wrote a whole article on how the Protestant-Catholic issue helped to create the government school system. You'll find that in the Epic Times. And it's in the context of the Supreme Court decision dealing with Montana, the Espinoza case. So people can find that. It's part of a series I've done. But yes, a lot of I would say the driving force behind the government indoctrination system was almost to a man, led by people who rejected God. However, they were able to dupe some of the Protestant ministers, not all, but they were saying, look, we've got huge Catholic immigration coming in from Southern Europe right now. If we keep allowing this and we don't get to the Catholic children, America's going to lose its kind of Protestant character, and we're going to become more of a Catholicized nation. So let's set up schools where we're going to disseminate Protestant views on things. And there were a lot of Protestant ministers who spoke out against this, and the Catholics did the smart thing. They said, no, we're going to set up our own parochial school system. It took the Protestants until really the 1970s to realize, oh my goodness, we're losing our children. We should be having Christian, with the exception of the Lutherans, they did good creating parochial schools as well. But huge, important question. I addressed it in a lot of detail in that article in the Epoch Times. But yes, some Protestant ministers were duped into going along with these really anti-Christian, anti-biblical ideas because of what you said. They wanted to make sure that the Catholics would become assimilated into America as they migrated here. So, do we have more time, Dominique? No, very good. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. God bless you.